everyone. Welcome to the seventh webinar organized by Research Scholars Forum, IIT Bombay, on the post-PhD opportunities. I am Shujishree. I am an Executive Council member from RSF. So I'll be hosting today's session. So welcome everyone to the webinar, and I especially welcome Professor Kasturi Saha, our today's speaker in the webinar. And before I ask her to address the session, I'd like to give a brief introduction of Professor Saha. So Professor Kasturi Saha is an assistant professor at the Department of Electrical Engineering at IIT since 2016. So she completed her MSc in physics from IIT Delhi in 2008, and she completed her PhD in physics from Cornell University in 2013. And she has done postdoctoral research from 3 years at Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, from 2013 to 2016. So Professor Saha has received multiple awards as TS Inspire Faculty and Indian Institute of Technology Bombay Young Faculty Award, Young Faculty Fellowship. So good evening, Professor. We really appreciate you joining us here in this webinar organized by RSF. So Professor Saha has insisted that this be an informal session. So without dragging the introduction too much, I'm directly handing it over to our speaker. So ma'am, please start. And we'll be adding more people here. So I mean, you don't have to be worried about it. We'll keep adding more people as they join. And
okay.
Everyone, just keep your microphones muted and your ears muted. You'll get a chance to ask questions after this session in the chat box. Thank you. And please start.
Okay, thank you for this introduction, and thank you for inviting me for this seminar today. I hope I'm audible clearly. Is it okay? Am I audible
Yes,
clearly?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So welcome all of you to this extremely gloomy day in Bombay and away from campus. I hope you are all getting geared up to come back hopefully sometime soon. So this seminar is sort of, when I was preparing for this seminar, I sort of thought back on and reflected on my postdoctoral work, and it reminded me of many fond memories of the postdoctoral work that I did at MIT. So I'll be very happy to talk about it and what I felt when I was applying, and what was my experience during this postdoctoral period. Without further ado, so let me get started on this. So as you can see, when you apply for, or when you're thinking about a postdoc, you have to, there are many stages. So the first stage is to think, are you ready for doing a postdoc? Am I fit for a postdoc? Are you ready to be ready for a postdoc? So it's important to really assess this pretty much when you are so the first thing to do is really talk to your advisor, right? Because when you make an assessment of whether you want to go into an industrial job, or whether you really want to stick to academics, or you want to do a postdoc and then go into an industrial job, those are things that something that you really have to assess. And therefore begins the process of application. And any process of application, if you think about from the time of your BTech, you already know that you almost pretty much started about a year before you are ready to finish. So postdoctoral work is very, very similar. You must estimate the time of your graduation, and from the time of your graduation you sort of backtrack and try to make some sort of a timeline as to what are the steps that you need to follow to get started. So the first thing that you must and really must do is assess your work, and how many papers do you have? Are you ready to even apply for a postdoctoral position? So typically I advise, and what my PhD advisor had made a rule was that you typically have about 3 papers before you graduate. And before you have those 3 papers, we don't even discuss sort of graduation. 3 first author papers, not 3 papers where you are, second, third, fourth author. And it's not necessary that you will always, so not all fields work in the same way. Not all, conferences sometimes are much more important than journal papers, and different fields have their different norms. And therefore, I am talking about from a perspective of a physicist, electrical engineer, where typically journal papers are important and conferences also count. But essentially, when you're looking ahead to do a postdoctoral work, you must have about 2 to 3 papers, first author papers, to begin with, to even start thinking about a postdoctoral position, right? So estimating the time to graduation, and maybe the third paper, maybe you have already written 2 papers and you are expecting to write the third paper, or you may have 2 papers already in the work, and those things, those assessments have to be made. So timing is very, very critical, and time management becomes even more critical, because as you near graduation, you will see the amount of work exponentially increases. One, you are trying to finish up your experiments, or suppose your papers, and at the same time you're going to about start writing your thesis, and at the same time you have to prepare for your applications. And these applications are non-trivial. So there are depending on the country that you want to go to, or within India itself, there are multiple different kinds of applications. And so for each of these different applications and fellowships, you have different kinds of deadlines. And typically for some of the foreign applications, and because I did my postdoctoral work in US, the applications for all the better high-end fellowships are in September and October, in fact. And that means that you already have to start thinking about, say, if you're thinking to graduate in say summer in a given year, you have to think 1 year ahead of time. So start thinking from summer, which means April, May, and then the time to apply for fellowships is about September, October, November, and then you follow up and sort of go into the next phase. And in the meantime, these fellowships are actually not easy to get. So you really have to pay attention to the requirements of the fellowships, whether it requires you to contact the PI well ahead of time, or you just write your proposal and you sort of get things going already. So these are all different steps, and different fellowships have different requirements, and they have no matter where you apply, you will be typically asked to get recommendation letters. And recommendation letters are better if your PI is of course the person of some, you need letters. And partner that you have been working with, or other people you have networked with, and which brings me to this very important point, that during your PhD you must make it a point to make these connections and network to the people who will then be in your future, become an important part of your life. Because at the end of the day, we live in a human society, we live with people in connection and contacts, and networking always help us. And therefore it's at least try to do one collaborative project. You may be one-on-one working with your advisor, but at least try to do one collaborative project, one large team project, where you will have access to these people who will give you your recommendation letters. So you may think that, well, your PhD advisory committee or the people who evaluate you can give you recommendations. Not necessarily are those recommendations very useful, because these are people who are faculty who are there to guide you through the process, and that guiding process your advisor is already doing, and that point of view is already represented by your advisor. It is better to have recommendation letters from people who you directly work with, other people. And so it could be an external collaborator that really helps. Another is an industry, person, or it could just be another mentor in a different situation where you have directly worked with. Essentially, these are people who have to be connected to your area of research so that they can give a judgment on your the way you have worked, or you have taught, or you have those are the people who are important. So if you're TAing a course, then that also counts, because you have directly one-on-one interacted with that person, with that PI, and you essentially can get feedback from that person, that instructor, and he should be able to, he or she should be able to give you a recommendation letter. And teaching really counts, and therefore these TA positions also can become very important, because you can also get a recommendation letter from the TA instructor, for instance. That is one aspect. So the important thing, of course, is, are you ready? So you have to gauge whether you are ready. You start discussing this with your advisor, and then you estimate time and go backwards and come up with a timeline. So a timeline is very crucial for anything as you move on, right? So the next thing that really is important is to understand, what do you want out of your postdoc? So do you really want to continue with the topic that you were doing your PhD on, or do you want to move into something else? There could be pros and cons of both. So depending on the topic that you are interested in, you will have to look for advisors in those fields. And that is where any of these conferences really help. And remember, as I mentioned, networking is very important. So if during your PhD, if you went for some conference, you must make it a point to meet 3 new people who you can interact with in future. So these are the people who could be your prospective advisors for your postdoctoral work. And and this is something that I am sort of I pass on to my students, and I'm passing on to all of you, what my advisor, my PhD advisor told me, that every time you go to a conference, make it a point to meet 10 new people. Of these 10 new people, 3 should be faculty, and the rest 7 could be anybody. And if you make it a habit to follow this rule, that you go up and speak to a completely unknown person, you will learn skills, and that is beyond something that we can teach you in a very close knit environment. So it is very important that you form these contacts. And when you're choosing your prospective postdoctoral advisor, they are the people who will come in play, and you can even refer to them to in your email when you're writing them the email. And I'll come to this email point in just a little bit. That that, hey, remember I spoke to you and we interacted with each other in a certain place in this conference, and you were there, we discussed all these things. These things will really come into play when somebody remembers out of their memory, oh, okay, yes, I perhaps met you. So those things make a difference. And if you make it a point to start from the very beginning during your PhD, these things, whether you're applying for a postdoc or whether you're applying for a job, it will count no matter what. So choosing a topic, of course, is very important. And I think that choosing a topic that is as far away from your PhD work, but however related, will be the most advisable thing to do. And it's a very steep climb. It's hard. It's not easy. First of all, it will not be easy for you to find a postdoctoral position where you will be working on something that is completely different from your PhD work, because everybody, as a PI also, I am looking for the skill set, the particular skill set in you. And therefore, I'm also looking for that particular niche area where you can contribute. So it's not easy to find something that is completely different from your PhD work, but as far away as you can, try to look for topics that interest you. And the question then is, how do you really form the choice for these topics. The best way is, and again you have to come back and you start from the very beginning during your PhD, is you attend as many different kinds of talks as possible. When you during, in IIT Bombay we have so many different kinds of speakers. Try to go and sit and listen to different kinds of seminars, meet different people, learn different things, learn new things, and you never know where something can become applicable to you. And it really becomes very important when you start finding and connecting these dots and finding that this topic is related to another topic, is related to another topic, and you may find that one or the other thing may interest you. So that's really something, that's how you would choose a topic, I would say. But beyond everything else, location plays a very important role in finding a postdoctoral position. So by the time you are almost ready for doing your postdoctoral work, you would have already married, or you would be thinking of marrying, or settling down in some form. And it's always a choice, and it's a hard choice, whether you want to stay next to your family or whether you want to go be ambitious, go to some other location, do something extremely ambitious. These are hard choices. It's not easy, and everything is always a give and take, and everything has a price. And I see that a lot from my own life, where I have chosen to live away from my family from the age of 18, because I did my BSc in St. Stephen's, which was already in Delhi. And I still remember the very first day when I was away from home, how hard it was. Of course, over time you become used to it, but many of you may have come to IIT Bombay for the first time living away from family. And when you go away from further, it becomes harder and harder and more challenging, as you learn to interact with more people. And also at the same time, you want to keep your bond to your family. So location is extremely important. If you are married, of course, location determines, whether you are close to your partner or not, or spouse or not. And therefore, sometimes it is wise that you may choose, and it's totally your personal, choice, whether you will go to a location where your, spouse or partner is there, or you would both travel together and do something together. Or if you think of it that way, 3 years is which is a typical duration of a postdoctoral fellowship, 2 to 3 years, is not that bad. You can be strong and you can be firm, and you can make the choice to go and be ambitious and do something that is away from your family. I always say this is hard. It's a hard decision, and if you have a kid, then it's even harder. Then it's not advisable in most cases that you go spend some time away from your family. But I have seen women who have done it. I have also seen men who have done it, and it is but it's something that you have to, of course, discuss with your family. And you may want, if you do get a position which is really a very, very prestigious position, go for it. Make that hard choice, and actually it will be very rewarding if you make that hard choice and make that step towards the harder choice. It's always rewarding. So as I think of it, in this particular case, choosing a topic, choosing your advisor, choosing the location, at the end of the day, they are all related to each other. So you may not find the choice of your topic and advisor and the location all in the same place. And then it becomes really, what is it that you really want to do? So at the end of the day, choosing your next step after your PhD is really a discussion with yourself about what is it that you want out of life? What is it that you want to do with your life? What is it that interests you, makes you wake up every day and say, I want to go back and do my work? Because if you don't connect with yourself in that sense, you will really not be happy in the next 3 years. And remember, and I always tell my PhD students also this, that your PhD is the prime part of your life, the really at the helm, when you should be enjoying life as much as being committed to your work. your postdoctoral work is also in the same phase where you need to enjoy your life, but at the same time be committed to it. You have to be committed to your professional life, that this time to this time is my professional time, this time to this time is my life, my own time. Those distinctions have to be made, and those timelines have to be made. And unless you make those connections with yourself and come up with the exact format in which you are going to work, you're not going to be successful. So in some way, it, as I said, it's always a give and take. So everything has a price. So if you sort of pay, if you play too much, then you don't do your work too much. And if you don't do your work, you don't get your PhD, you don't get your papers. So there is always a price. So sometimes you uh, have to stay up nights, you have to stay away from family, you have to be harsh on yourself, and those are all rewarding and they all have their time. But at the same time, you must keep in mind that this is the time that will never come back. Never ever in your life will you get back the same 5 years of your PhD or the same 3 years of your postdoc. So you must enjoy it as much as possible. And therefore, this choice of topic, choice of advisor, choice of location, they're all tied to each other. And you must sort of connect with yourself to understand what is it that you want to choose at that point of time in your life to make that perfect choice. Okay, so once you're ready to apply, you would have applied. And I'm really not talking about the details of the steps for how to write your CV, how to write or your application and all those are a lot of details. And I'm sure this is the 7th seminar, so you would have heard many different things. So I'm really not going into all of those details. If you have a question and you have some specific questions on how to do each of these steps, you should just email me or you talk to me, and we can discuss this at a later point of time. And of course, if you have any questions, you should definitely ask during the question answer session. Okay, so what about the interview? Before you even start thinking about, during the process of your application, you must do your homework. You must try to see each of these advisors' profiles. You have to understand what they are working on. So like I said, it is a big challenge and time commitment, and therefore time management will become very crucial, because you actually have to understand what this person does. If you really want to know whether you fit in their group or not, you must read their papers. And this is something that will take one step further from the usual applicants that I see, that they just see the website and then you just say that, oh, I think this is interesting, I think I could fit in there. It will not make an impact. If you want to make an impactful application, if you want to write an impactful application, you have to do your homework. And you have to talk to the people in those groups a priori. You must form an understanding of what they are doing, how the people are, where the people are going after their postdoc, or where the students are going after their graduation for PhD. Everything will count, and each of these things will count in doing your homework. Now, when you write your first email to a prospective advisor, you must introduce yourself, mention only the most important achievement of your PhD. So if you would have written a paper that is very impactful, write it in very layman statement, 1 or 2 lines only about the most important and impactful work that you have done in your PhD. Or you expect that, this is the area in which I want to contribute, and this really has a huge impact in general. So introduce yourself in that way. Then immediately you sort of catch the attention of the person who's reading your email. The next thing to do is mention the estimated time of graduation. So for instance, from my perspective as a PI, when I am looking to hire someone, I would like to know when this person will join. So typically you must, therefore this gauging of when you are going to graduate is very important. So you must, and also must have discussed this with your advisor. So don't form an opinion in your head and write it out, and then you realize your advisor is in a completely different page. So no, you should definitely discuss this with your advisor, and you should always be in touch with your advisor and take their opinion. Okay, well, I'm applying to this person, do you know this person? Also, advisors contacts form are very helpful. So when you have thought about, when you have done your homework and you think you like a certain person and a certain group, you must discuss this with your advisor and say that, okay, well, do you know this person, what is your opinion, what about, how you think, should I go there or not. Every advisor has their own opinion about their colleagues and their friends and groups and everything, and it's an important time to make that connection, which will allow you later on to connect with. So you can even mention in your email that my advisor knows you, or from written reference from my advisor I am emailing you. So those kind of things immediately, one-to-one connection always helps. Therefore, these things have to be openly discussed with your advisor. So mention your estimated time, pinpoint the projects that you're going to be interested in contributing. Now this is very important, because as you sort of know that if I'm looking for a person, I am already in my mind forming a picture whether I want to, I don't know what is going on. What is somebody using? Yeah, okay. So you want to really pinpoint. Yeah. So you want to really pinpoint the projects that you're interested in contributing. So typically these things you can find on the website, and you can also read some papers in detail, and you can form an opinion of a project where you think you can contribute, or there is something ongoing and you think there is a possibility that you can contribute in. That really catches the attention of the person reading your email, because one, they may have already thought of hiring another person, or they are thinking possibly to hire somebody in future. If you can pinpoint which projects that you are interested in, these things will catch the attention of the person. The next thing is, when you write these emails, always get it reviewed by uh, another person, your friend or your PI, so that there is nothing that you reveal that you should not have revealed, or you should not make a mistake in spelling or grammar or these kind of things. Any mistake of grammar or spellings and small errors, they make a very negative impact from the very beginning. You don't want those kind of things. So pay some attention, pay some time, and pay some make some sincere effort to write a letter. It makes a big difference. The next thing is that nobody replies in one go. And to be honest, if you get a response in the very first time somebody, when you write a letter, then you are really, really lucky, because you would have got that person suddenly without any work. When I was a student, I would always think that, hey, I wrote this email, I don't know what this person is doing, has not replied for about a month. And I would think that what do these people do? And now that I'm in a faculty's position, I can clearly understand what goes on. We get bombarded with emails, and it's not only one email, many emails. And so even if I think that, I will reply to one email, I sort of forget about it after a period of time, because I get caught in with some other work and get distracted. And then, it just goes into that pile of things to do. And sometimes it just gets missed out. There is no harm in being patient and sending a reminder or two, to just to sort of bring it to the forefront in the inbox. It helps. And it's not like somebody's trying to avoid you or not trying to read your application or whatever. It just happens. It really naturally just happens, because you get bombarded with multiple different types of emails, and emails of different kinds of applications. So not just postdoctoral, you have interns, you have this, that, so many people want to get email you, and it just gets lost. So it's okay. Sending a reminder maybe after 2 to 3 weeks is a good time. So don't send a reminder immediately after 1 week, because then it just shows that you're impatient and you're not ready to wait for some time. Sometimes people get, we are busy, and then, sort of, and you want about a week or week or two at least before you can send a reminder. Okay. So that's something to keep in mind when you're, contacting a person for the first time. Now, suppose the person you are looking to work with has replied to you and wants to have a phone call with you, or have a Skype call or whatever with you. Very key important thing, and something that when I was applying for my postdoc, one of my advisors and mentors mentioned that, send a couple of slides before talking on the phone. It really helps connecting you with the prospective person that you're talking to, and that person will already have something to look at and understand about you. And these slides should be very, very precise. It should contain what is your contribution in your PhD, and where have you done something novel. If you're doing experimental work, then what is exactly your contribution? Did you do the fabrication? Did you build the setup? Or if you're doing theoretical work, did you come up with that thing yourself, the idea yourself? Or if you build some simulation model, then, or some platform, then you must make those, each of those points very, very clear, one or two sentences and in nice pretty pictures. It makes a huge impact. Just 2 slides, not more than that. You don't want to waste somebody's time. Nobody wants to look at 20 slides and decide whether you're a good student or a bad student, or you are interested or not. No, I don't have the time to do that. You should just send 2 slides before you talk on the phone. And on the day you speak to that prospective person, you should send a reminder mail saying that, look, here is a couple of slides I would like you to go through before we discuss on the phone or Skype. Okay, that really helps. It will help you connect with the person that you're going to talk to, and it will take your, and it will also give a structure to the discussion. Otherwise, sometimes they may ask you some random arbitrary questions, and you may not be prepared, and you may be in a false position to sort of land up in when you're interacting with a person for the first time. So giving a couple of slides, sharing a couple of slides before you talk to a person structures the conversation. And even say, as a person who is having this conversation, the PI may also feel awkward. Okay, I don't know this person, I don't know, what do we start discussing. Those things are very human. So it's important to have a starting point in your conversation, and this goes in a long way. Okay, so once you are done with this, and suppose you are asked to give a presentation about your work, a longish, say a 40 minutes presentation. A typical interview is about 40 minutes presentation. You should really prepare for that interview, and you should prepare and make sure you present it with your friends, your and especially if you're trying to apply for a position that has that is very less related to your PhD work, may not be the person who's listening, the people who are going to be there in your audience are not familiar with your work, then you should try to practice it with your friends who are not in your field. And that will really help to get their feedback about whether they are able to follow or not. And most likely it will be that situation. So practice with your friends who are not in your field, prepare for the interview, let them ask you questions, be open, and be prepared to answer questions from different backgrounds. And it will give you a level of preparedness that is required for an interview preparation. And postdoc is a step. If you're in academics, of course, postdoc is a step just before your, when you want to become a faculty, or you could skip a postdoctoral position, directly apply for faculty. Whether you're applying for faculty position or a postdoctoral position, when you're preparing for your interview, it is important that you practice for your interview, and practice it multiple times. It will help you. Okay, so now what happens if you sort of go through this entire process of having gone through this identification? You figured out who you want to work with, now you've applied, and they've given you offers. Okay, so now you have 2-3 different offers, and in a very good situation, you would like, and I would advise you, be ambitious. Be very ambitious, because you're one step closer to forming that path in your career where you could do something different, something challenging, something very ambitious. And groups that publish a lot, you would want to work with people who will give you the opportunity to form yourself and groom and grow as you sort of go through this postdoctoral work. And I've said time and again, be as far away from your PhD work as possible. And then, of course, family could be a deciding factor. You would want to take all these things. But at the end of the day, all our decisions and decision making always happens at a personal level and personal gut feeling. Will I be happy in that group? Is something that you should already figure out when you're talking to when you're giving this seminar, when you're discussing with all the group members, etc. You should figure that out. You should form that opinion. Will I be happy working in that group? Is it a happy group? Is it a bad group? Is it, are they only talking about competing with each other? You don't want to be in an environment where everybody wants to compete with each other. That's not a very happy place to be in. You are just going to be overburdened with work, and you don't want to be in those kind of scenarios. Of course, you may not have the choice, but if you do have a choice, go with your gut feeling, see whether you're going to be happy or not. It's a very important thing that you must analyze and decide for yourself. Since childhood, we have always been told what to do. See, as you grow up in 11, 12, your parents would say, from the very beginning, they would say, oh, you should become a doctor, you should become an engineer, or you should do this, or you should do that. We somewhere lose our own decision making abilities. It is a good time during your PhD, make some decisions for yourself, make some life choices for yourself. And that is where the gut feeling will come in. And that gut feeling doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from small choices, and small choices that you make every day. Whether you made the choice of going for a movie, or whether you made the choice of sitting and doing your homework that day, is your choice, is your feeling that you that is your personal ability to connect with yourself and about what makes you feel happy. So these are things that you, and you were asked happen to work in a field that is completely unrelated to my PhD work. And somewhere it took me a lot of time to find a postdoctoral position, because it was hard to convince a person that no, I can make a contribution, I can make a difference, although I am not from this particular field. It was hard. But nevertheless, once I got the position that I wanted to work with, I had to make a plan, because I had to learn 500 other things which were related to my work. And therefore, making a plan for your project from day one, sitting down with your postdoctoral advisor, will be extremely important. So you should then learn new things different from your PhD. So if you haven't learned fabrication, or if you haven't learned some method for simulating, or some platform for controlling equipment or things like that, you should try to take it up as a challenge and learn it, right? And let me tell you, if you don't put in those hours, it's not going to work. Everything is dependent on how committed you are, how dedicated you are to those 2 to 3 years of work, where it will really be essentially defining your rest of your career. Again, we always think that my BTech is going to define my rest of my life, my master's is going to define my rest of my life. Yes, it will. Your postdoc is also going to define what you're going to do next, and therefore putting in those hours to make it count will really make you go a long way. The other thing that I sort of personally relate to is independence. And independence, but something that is tied to teamwork and leadership. These are qualities that have to be inculcated. Okay, so you should, if you haven't worked as a team in your PhD, when you go for your postdoc, try to work in a team. Because at the end of the day, although we are scientists who have never been taught to work in a team, who have never been taught management skills, not been taught people skills, ultimately, when as a PI, when I'm running my group, it is my interpersonal relationship with you, the students, and the people around me in my faculty, my colleagues, my friends, everybody that counts. And when you are doing your postdoctoral work, apart from all your academic activities, spend some time in learning these, interpersonal skills, people skills, leadership skills. And when you're going to make that next big jump to your, hopefully your final step in your career, um, you will need these things. You will need, people look forward to leadership, people look forward to people who can work in teams, people who can be independent thinkers. These are qualities that, as I make assessments of my student, or of my postdoc, it is important to build these qualities. And if you don't have them, it's okay. You are a PhD student, you should learn to get these qualities right from day one. And then also, during your postdoctoral work, you can, discuss this, and these are things that you can actually discuss openly with your advisor. In fact, these are things I did during my postdoctoral work, where I went for leadership workshops, where I went for teamwork, workshops. And these are things that you have to learn. We are not taught these things. All through childhood, you are, made to do rote learning. Okay, A, B, C, you learn, and then you are asked a question, and out of those A, B, C, you are supposed to give an answer. But teamwork or leadership or independence does not come from doing ABC and then answering one out of those. It comes from different kind of activities that you do, related to your PhD work, and within your group you can form these kind of skill sets, which will always help you. And then the other thing is always travel and network. And one of my favorite things to do is always the opportunity you get to travel, you should travel. You should make it a habit to go and travel and network with people, conferences, and now everything is becoming online. It is even better because you can actually network with so many people, and get connected with so many people just sitting at your home. Okay. Remember, your journey in your postdoc will never be just an individual achievement. It will always be, I take away from my postdoctoral work is that my postdoctoral advisor really banked on me to take care of undergraduates, take care of visitors. Whenever they visited, when somebody came, she would always say, hey Kasturi, there is somebody, I'm not able to deal with this, can you please take care of this person? And would just be happy to leave it. That kind of level of confidence only comes when you show your attitude towards taking care of certain things, saying and putting your foot forward, saying that I am willing to commit my time to doing these XYZ other activities different from my actual core work. And of course, you really, it is hard. Time management then becomes really important. And so all of those things, if you can take along people with you during your, and that's why I have this little, cartoon here, where I have the blue person sort of holding the hand of another person. If you can hold along the hand of other people and pull them up along with you and take them along with you, that goes to show that you can work in a team, and that you can, motivate other people and get other people to go from one place to another while you are also doing your job, right? Remember, your advisor is always watching you. And this is something that I have noticed from my PhD, from my postdoctoral work. Uh, and you should keep this in mind. What you do today, the choices you make, your advisor is noticing you, and they are noticing whether you make the effort to do something out of your way and do your work, or you're doing your work exactly. Well, not everybody is able to do everything, so that is okay. So don't make it hard on yourself that, oh, I have to actually do this. No, I really have to do this. I have to put myself and go beyond what is required. That is not true. What I mean to say here is that push yourself to the point where you think you can contribute, and it will be noticed. because these things are always noticed by us, by me, and I always watch whether, you know, certain things are going on in a certain way. So when somebody is, you know, for example, working in a team, and you know, I see some of my students naturally helping other students, and that is a quality that, you know, when a PI writes about you in your recommendation letter, it is those things that will go in, that beyond the ABCD things that I had asked this person to do, this person in addition also helped so and so, or took charge of, you know, training another graduate student, or, you know, went to this workshop and, you know, came out as a leader. And these are qualities that ultimately makes your recommendation look beautiful and impactful, rather than, you know, just saying that, oh, this person did excellent job in their work and published XYZ papers. That is not a human recommendation. And recommendation letters typically, as a know-how for you to, you know, sort of keep in mind that you can always one can always write a recommendation letter which says that you are an excellent person who has, you know, done you know, exceptionally well in academics and has published 10 papers. That's exceptional, that is very good. But what people often look for is, were you a good team worker? Were you able to connect to different people? Were you able to do something different from what your other peers have done? And these things will matter. And that's where, if you haven't had the opportunity to do it during your PhD work, you should take you know, be aware of it, and make it a point to do something different in your postdoc, and, you know, take away from your postdoc would be one such thing. With that, I will sort of end my discussion about, you know, what I feel would be a post PhD, you know, experience, and I'm very happy to take questions, and I'm hoping that I'll be able to help you out with the kind of thoughts you have. So yeah, I'm ready to take questions.
Ma'am, you're not audible.
Hello? Yeah, I'm ready to take questions. Yeah. Hello?
Hi. So thank you, Professor Shah, for the amazing presentation. So we have already got a couple of questions. So if anyone else also wants to ask any question, please mention them in the chat box. Ma'am, we've got 3 questions so far. So I'll be reading them out. Also, you can answer.
Sure.
So
Go ahead.
The first
Sorry,
question is that.
Yeah, go ahead.
The first question, does visa and other processes take more time? And how much saving should one have before reaching the host country?
That's a good question. Actually, visas recently have become, am I audible? Is it better now? Is it okay?
Yes, it's audible.
Okay. So yeah, visas actually are becoming trickier and trickier nowadays. So if you're especially going to US, J1 visa is the typical visa that is used for postdoctoral fellowships, and sometimes it goes into academic H1B. And now, of course, there is a ban on academic H1B for quite some time. But for J1 visas, it typically takes about from the time you get your offer letter, it will take you about 2 months for them to actually process the application, where they'll give you the actual letter where you can use that can be used for applying your visa. And then once you get that formal letter, and you've sort of signed your contract and everything, you can take the visa date. Typically it takes about a month or so before you can apply for your dates for visa, for J1 visa. And then from that time, it depends on whether you get a 221G or not. If you get a 221G, we don't know till it can be about from a month to 2 months to 3 months before you can get approval for visa. But if you don't, if you're not unlucky and they don't do background check on you, then you can easily get it within, so the total time from the day you get your, offer letter to the time you get your visa could be about up to 3 to 4 months. So keep enough time in hand, I would say, and always keep the person that you want to apply, that you are applying to, keep them informed of your visa situation. Of course, it is slightly different for countries in Europe. I think for countries in Europe there are different visa norms, and it typically takes about at least 2 to 3 months again to go through all the formalities and ensuring that you have the visa for doing your postdoctoral work. So that was the question, right? So J1 visa, and did I miss out?
What about visa availability?
Yeah.
We, please
Go
continue.
ahead. No, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, so we have got a couple more questions. So the next question is, due to COVID-19, getting a postdoctoral position is hard. I was thinking of taking up a short-term faculty position till I get a postdoc, but will this short-term experience count when I apply for faculty position after a postdoc in top-tier colleges like IIT?
Yeah, any experience counts. So as long as you don't sit and waste your time, whether you are working as a project RA in some other position, or you work as in a college for some time. See, any college application or any other application, faculty position applications will take a lot of time. I would suggest, rather, if you are interested in doing a postdoctoral work after this, don't go for a college position. It's better to do, continue the position in your own group, or and that's what we used to do in US, because it's not, the start date is sort of undefined, and until you get that definite answer, you sort of make a deal with your advisor that I will stay on till I get my final date for leaving and starting the new job. So try to do something in between. College applications are a little more tedious, and it will take a lot more time and energy. In between, if you can find a project RA position, or an interim postdoc position somewhere local, if you're interested to do a postdoctoral position outside, then it works out much better. Yeah.
Thank you. The next question is whether the tenure of postdoctoral fellowship can vary from 1 year to 3 years, or is it a fixed tenure?
It will vary. Some positions are contract positions only up to a year. Some positions are 2 years. Fellowships are typically 2 years, and some positions are 3 years. So in US, the norm was that you get the position for 1 year, which is renewed for the next year, and it's the same here also in IITs, that you have a fellowship for 1 year, an institute postdoctoral fellowship for 1 year, which is renewed again for next year. So typically, you can think the net time for working will be 3 years, 2 to 3 years at least. But in your contract, they will never say it is 3 years. It will always be 1 year and then renewed, because that is how things work, and nobody gives a contract already for 3 years unless it's a fellowship. It's a very specific fellowship which is for 2 years or 3 years or whatever. So yeah, it depends on where you are going and what you're doing.
So next question is age an important factor to get a postdoctoral position? I'm asking because I started my PhD journey a little late, and now I am looking for a postdoc position at the age of 46, which I feel is one of the critical aspects of my career growth. This is anxiety about age. So if you could answer this.
Yeah, so I don't think really age matters so much. As long, and if you are 46 and you want to still do a postdoctoral work, then you better have good reasons for it. You have to be able to justify why you did your PhD later, and what made you think of doing your PhD later, and why you now want to do a postdoc and not go back to doing some job. So, and how committed you are, because as you grow older, there are family ties which will become important. And the younger you are, of course, it's more helpful but it's really, those things are personal, and those things are, as long as you are committed to doing your work and you are able to justify why you want to do something at a certain age, it is okay. But it is better to form, contact the people then personally, and make sure you have these discussions openly with your PI. Yeah. Okay.
I find it interesting to stray away a bit from the work done in PhD for a postdoc. So how does one select a project to contribute to? Also, how do you convince a prospective PI about me being relevant for them?
Very good question. Yeah. So, how do you choose something that is far away? See, that is where I said, if you go sit and listen to talks about related areas to your work. So, I mean, for me, I could give you an example exactly directly my personal experience. So, for my PhD work, I worked on optical frequency combs. It's highly nonlinear, physics and nonlinear optics. And then I did my postdoctoral work in uh, quantum technologies, and in particular these NV centers in Diamond. And there, the only thing that is optics is really just the laser that is used for probing these spins. Now, as you can see, there is no relation with my PhD work to my postdoctoral work. And clearly it was extremely hard. But what I could explain was that, look, conceptually, when I took my undergraduate courses, or when I took my master's courses or PhD level courses, I have covered many aspects of these, things that the related area is sort of, sort of what are the essential things of the related area. So for instance, like I did take courses of quantum mechanics, which are, or condensed matter physics, which are extremely high level courses, which form really the backbone of fundamental physics that is used for probing for the other related areas. So your background must at least be uh, sort of, your coursework must be such that you should have, you should be able to apply your knowledge into another. So given the opportunity to refresh back those set of things, you can then start applying those techniques and learn something new very quickly. Of course it is hard, but if you during your PhD work on 2 to 3 projects, and not just one project, or if you can show from your PhD work that, look, I did this thing, but I also did this another thing which is slightly different from, and I learned something completely new in a very small time frame, then that really helps to justify that you can pick up something completely different and learn something different. And those are the kind of things that you can use to justify how you could be able to contribute to the person. But again, as I said, it is hard and it's challenging. But definitely don't work in the same area as your PhD, or at least not the same topic. Exact area could be the same, but not the exact same topic, because that leaves you with no doors open for doing something different, and that doesn't help, because when you apply for your a faculty position, people want to see whether you can adapt to a new situation. Suppose there is no funding in what you are trying to do, will you be able to do something different or not? uh, those are things that will only come up if you have the hand and the practice to do multiple different things. Yes. Yeah, I think that is what I would have to say about this.
So you spoke about environment in the workplace. So how to understand if the group to which I'll be applying has a harsh competitive environment with, or not? So what are the signs I should look into?
Ah, it is a very emotional thing, I think. It is the connection that you sort of, it's your gut feeling. If you see people who talk to each other and people who work in a team will go out for lunches together, it's a very healthy sign that they go out for movies together. You, as you know, you can think about it from your own perspective. When you have friends, do you go out with all of your friends? No, of course not. You go out with a select bunch of friends. And why do you go out with them? Because you sort of relate to them. And the sign of a happy group is that they would typically, talk to each other, not hesitate to call one another, not hesitate to discuss about another person's, project. And those things can only be judged if you make a visit to a place and talk to them face to face. You will see those things. If two people fight with each other, you think they'll sit next to each other and talk to each other? No, they don't. Those are signs directly that tell you whether they are happy or not, and whether they are working together or not, or whether they at least relate to each other or not in a group. And you don't necessarily have to, people are competing with each other. Everybody is competing with everyone. It's the natural thing to be in state in. But you can, it is your, you have to learn to gauge, if people are able to talk to each other frankly, openly, discuss something openly. Those things are, yeah, you can find out. Those things can be found out. Okay.
We have like several more questions, but due to time constraints, we will be taking only one or two more questions. So Vinay Narayana, I think he raised hand. So I'll ask him to unmute and ask the question directly to the speaker. After him, we will be taking just one more question because we are operating under a time constraint.
Sure.
So Vinay, please.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes, you're audible.
Am I audible?
Yes,
You're
you
audible.
Okay. Thank you, Kasturi ma'am, for sharing your thoughts, first of all. I was wondering, so let's say for some reason one is not able to go for a postdoc position immediately after PhD. Uh, is there any parallel kind of thing or anything I can do to secure an academic position at institutions such as IITs? Is the way not postdoc, then I certain things that I can do to secure an academic position?
Yeah, I mean, there are many different options. You can go work in a company if you want, or you can do an internship in a different place, in a different location if you want. Definitely a college teacher's job is a different option. As long as you don't have a gap in your profile, I think it is okay. Yeah. You can even continue to work in your own group, and I mentioned, so if you can discuss with your advisor and sort of make a deal saying, okay, I will graduate, but then if you have a project position and let me stay on for some time and I can contribute and plan out a certain time frame of time, it is possible. You can do those things, and that's helpful. Yeah, but don't sit at home idle.
So
I think that is the most important. Yeah.
Yeah. So does the external exposure, like overseas exposure, matter that much, or it's okay if I get an work in an Indian company and in the same field, of course? So is it like a necessary thing to get an external exposure of research outside India to get into IIT?
No, it is not. No, it is not. That is not the requirement. The requirement is you do well wherever you go, and you do exceptionally well wherever you go. That is the requirement.
Okay.
So it is, on my, as a personal opinion, I would say, if you have the opportunity to go abroad, and in a good place, don't go to some random place just because you have to go. And it doesn't make sense if you go to a C-level institute and claim that I did a postdoctoral work there. That doesn't help and make you go anywhere. You have to go to a place which will show in that you have learned something there. That makes and you have to work exceptionally well there to justify that that it made a difference to my career. So, and that could be in India too. You could go to a company and done really well and come back and do something else. As long as you do well wherever you go, put in your efforts, make yourself committed to it, I think you are good to go. Yeah.
Due to time constraints, I'll be
Thank
only
you.
taking one more question.
Sure.
So I understand the pros of working on different topic in postdoc. Similarly, there are pros if you want to work in a similar area, but at the same
Right.
time, there are problems if you choose a totally different area during your postdoc. So if you could talk about that.
Yeah, so again, it's a personal choice, and that's the first thing. So it's a personal choice whether you want to do something different. It is going to be extremely hard. Let's admit it. You will have to learn something different to pick up and be able to do something uh, novel in that area is going to be hard and challenging. But like for instance, during my postdoctoral work, I published only one paper as a first author, but that was much later, after at the end of my postdoctoral work, almost, but not almost, at the time I was applying for my faculty position. And it can be extremely hard, because you need to have so remember, postdoctoral work is only for 3 years. You would want to apply almost again a 1 year ahead of time. You would start applying for different positions, next top positions, and it becomes hard, and that's really the disadvantage of it. But the advantage of it is that you can convince, and if you actually do well, you can convince the people around you in a much broader way, that you can adapt to a newer situation, a newer place, and still be able to do well. That's really the advantage of working in a different area. But see, if you work on something that you were doing your PhD and you went to another group that works on related things, and you can immediately pick up a project and publish like 5-10 papers out of it, or that is also equivalently good. There is nothing wrong with it. But what happens is that you are then limited by your skill set. Of course, if you make it a point to learn something different during, even within the same line of work, if you can learn something different and some new techniques and some new methodologies, then that's again a different way of thinking the same problem. That I'm making sure that I'm doing something different so that I can justify that I can do multiple things. That aspect has to be covered in some way. So you can, one, choose to work in something different from your PhD, because then that will give you a directly a line of opening up for you, a field that will open up for you. When you later on apply for academics, you can completely show that, well, I worked in a completely different field. Now I can, if required, if funding is not there in this field, I can apply and do something else. And that is really people who can adapt are the people who will survive and the people who will thrive. So, but that adaptation can be in different ways. It could be in a technique or it could be in a field. So that is what I would say.
Thank you, Professor Shah, for your time. That was a really informative and motivating presentation, and it was indeed a very interesting presentation. From RSF, we really appreciate the time that you've given to all of us for this talk. So I'm sorry for all the questions that I couldn't take in today's presentation due to time constraint. So I mean, the people who didn't get a chance to ask questions in today's presentation, please send your questions to our mail ID rsfitb@gmail.com, so we can direct them to the speaker. And once again, I thank all of you for participating in the presentation and making it such an interactive and interesting presentation. So before we conclude, I would like to invite all of you for the 8th lecture in this post-PhD series. It is organized on 8th July. The speaker is Professor Deepak Maria from Mechanical Engineering. So, I mean, in that note, we would like to conclude the presentation here. Thanks once again, Professor Shah. Your presence is really, really appreciated.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.